im se svima, i malima i velikima, i bogatima i siromašnima, i slobodnjacima i robovima, dade žig na njihovu desnu ruku ili na čela njihova, te da nitko ne može ništa kupiti ili prodati, osim onoga ko ima žig ili ime zvijeri ili broj imena njezina.
Pozdrav, dragi narode, dobrodošli u još jednu epizodu Slobodni. Vjeruj znanosti, slušaj struku. Zvuči vam poznato? To je današnja tema. Znamo da vjerovanje ne spada u znanost, nego sumnja, a vjerovanje spada u religiju. A slušaj struku ipak ima neka ograničenja, zato postoji informirani pristanak. Zato nas moraju informirati kako bi pristali na ono što će utjecati na nas. Današnja tema je važna zato što imamo znanost i imamo struku. Samo je pitanje izvor informacija i kako se tumači. Da li se znanost i struka koriste kao marketinški alat ili ipak imaju plemenitu namjeru da nam daju pravu informaciju, provjerenu i istraženu. Zato mi je čast danas pozdraviti mog gosta koji se upravo time bave i objavljuje članke analize znanstvenih radova. I njegovo ime je Michael Nervadakis. Hello, Michael. Welcome to our show in Croatia.
Yes, hello. Thanks for having me on.
Please, can you say a few words about your background?
Absolutely. So I'm a reporter with The Defender. The Defender is an online publication that is published by Children's Health Defense. Children's Health Defense, as some of your audience may know, was originally founded by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He's no longer with the organization because now he's the health secretary in the U.S. in the Trump administration, but he founded Children's Health Defense and The Defender. So I write several stories a week that have to do with several different topics, but one of these main areas that I write about is scientific studies. These are peer-reviewed studies that look at the possible risks that are involved, not just with the COVID vaccines that have been in the news for the last few years, but some other vaccines and treatments as well.
Yes, topic of today's show is that we will go through some of your work to show our audience science that I believe they don't know, maybe they never heard. Why? Because usually science this kind, what is not according to narrative, is censored. We were facing censorship for 5 years, and then beginning of this year, even a chief of the biggest network, social network, Facebook, admitted, yes, we done censorship because government was asking us to do it. And now there is no more censorship there. But during this time, you were analyzing peer-reviewed studies, and you were publishing this in a website of Children's Health Defense. And now we go through one of your most important work here. Let's start with the first one.
Okay, so should I go ahead? I'm not seeing it on my screen.
Yes, we have a first study says expression of SARS-CoV-2 spike protein in cerebral arteries, implication for hemorrhagic stroke post-mRNA vaccination.
Okay, yes. Well, thank you for that introduction. This is a new study. It is in the June 2025 edition of the Journal of Clinical Neuroscience. So it's the June edition, but it's already been published. It's available online. And it was co-authored by 6 Japanese researchers. They are based at various medical schools and hospitals in Japan. And what the study found, and we can go through the details, is that the spike protein that the mRNA COVID-19 vaccines contain was found in some patients for a long period of time. In one patient, it was 17 months after she was vaccinated. There were a couple of other patients for whom the spike protein was found 12 and 11 months after they received their vaccines. And what was the other really interesting finding about this study is that out of the 19 people that they studied, now these were all stroke victims, by the way, these are 19 people that suffered strokes. The ones in which spike protein was found were all women. So it was nearly half the sample, 43.8%. And the ones for whom spike protein was found in their organs, in their tissue, were all women. And the final thing I'll say about that, and then we can discuss, is that the vaccine manufacturers and also the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, one possibility that some studies have found, cardiovascular problems, heart problems being another. And these are the types of adverse events that we've seen very commonly among some vaccinated people, COVID vaccinated people in the last few years. So the spike protein may have these effects. And of course, it's not supposed to be having those effects if you believe that the spike protein was only supposed to remain in the body for a short period.
Tell me, is this sample of 19 people too small to make any conclusions? And did in the paper shows they had a control group?
Yes, the sample is small, and I believe that the researchers themselves said that the results, basically the main conclusion that we can draw from them is that we need more research into this topic. So it's an indicator that something is wrong. To my knowledge, I don't see that there was a control group. I think this was a retrospective study of these 19 stroke victims. So they are calling for more study in this issue and more sophisticated studies in this issue. They're not passing this off as sort of like the final conclusive results. But there's certainly something there. There's certainly a signal that is there that warrants more investigation, and that's what the researchers are saying.
Okay, great. That means there is a correlation, but we don't know if it's a causation. We need to explore more. Okay, let's continue with the next study.
Okay, so the next study, and I'm getting it up on my screen, is titled The Impact of SARS-CoV-2 Infection on Vaccinated versus Unvaccinated Pregnant Women, a retrospective cohort study. Now, this was published in Springer Nature. This is significant. Springer is the largest academic and scientific publisher in the world. You were talking about censorship earlier. There have been scientists that have said in the last couple of years that Springer journals had censored them, but it seems that in the recent period, Springer and the editors of their journals have been more open to perspectives that are questioning in some way the vaccines and their safety. So 6 Spanish researchers were the co-authors of the study. It was published in April, so it's a recent study. And what this was is it's another retrospective study. It's similar to the Japanese study we just talked about, but with a larger sample. They looked at pregnant women, 156 of them, who tested positive for COVID-19 while they were pregnant between 2020 and 2022. Now, not all of these women were vaccinated. So you had 2 groups. They were all pregnant. They had all been infected with COVID during pregnancy, but only some of them had been vaccinated. Specifically, 45 out of the 156 were vaccinated. And what was found was, even though this was a strangely written study, we can talk about that, but what was found was that while there were 5 miscarriages among the group of unvaccinated women, which was 111 out of the 156 women, there were also that many miscarriages among the much smaller number of vaccinated women. So according to some analysts that looked at the study, I am quoting now Trial Site News, they call this a concerning anomaly, and especially because in the vaccinated women, most of the miscarriages happened in the first 2 trimesters, or in other words, the first 6 months of their pregnancies. So that's an interesting finding, and yet the authors of the study focused on these very limited positive outcomes of the vaccinated group, that they had lower rates of pneumonia, they had lower incidence of things like vomiting and headache, which are not really serious issues, but they kind of glossed over the miscarriages, which I thought was interesting.
Well, it seems so that we have serious concerns if there is a more benefit than harm in pregnant women. I had an interview also about Pfizer documents, and from their clinical trials, we saw the major part of pregnant women unfortunately lost their child during this test period, and nobody really want to investigate this, and they are still recommending vaccination against COVID-19 for pregnant women. I think we have here enough data to ask question, why don't we investigate this more? Because we always take care of pregnant women, and now we just so easily recommending something that doesn't bring them much benefit, as we see here from this paper.
Absolutely. If you look at what the CDC in the US is still saying on their website, quoting them exactly, COVID-19 vaccination during pregnancy is safe and effective, and they recommend getting the vaccine, quote, if you are pregnant, breastfeeding a baby, trying to get pregnant now, or might become pregnant in the future. So that's what the CDC is saying. What the trial site news is saying is that the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in the US, still has not actually declared that the mRNA COVID-19 vaccines are safe on the package insert, the little piece of paper that comes in the package with any sort of medication, including the vaccines. Trial site news also said that this unexpectedly high miscarriage rate that we saw in the vaccinated women, and we saw it early in their pregnancies, even though the numbers are limited, this is another small sample, cannot be dismissed without further research. So we're seeing another study where, in this case, the authors kind of ignored the miscarriages, but people that have analyzed the study are saying that the results show that this requires more research.
Let's go to the next study. This one is very interesting one, and it's coming from your native country in Greece.
Yes, this is an interesting study, and I think it's a study that caught some people almost off guard. It's titled Deaths Due to COVID-19 and Deaths with COVID-19. They had due to and with in quotation marks during the Omicron variant surge among hospitalized patients in 7 tertiary care hospitals in Athens, Greece. So this was published in Scientific Reports, another peer-reviewed journal, a rather large journal from what I understand, and it was published last month. So once again, it's a recent study. There were 19, to be exact, Greek doctors and researchers that co-authored this paper. And what's interesting is, I'm saying this anecdotally, I think at least one of the co-authors, and I think he's the corresponding author of this study, was on the Greek government's official COVID-19 recommendation committee during the pandemic. So this was someone that was actually involved, if I'm not mistaken, with some of the policy making during that period. So this study looked at people that died in 7 hospitals in Athens during a period of time, I think it was about 8 months in 2022. It was during the Omicron variant surge. And these were deaths that were recorded as COVID deaths. And what was found is that most of the deaths that were recorded as COVID deaths were actually not directly due to COVID-19. They were just people that happened to, be infected with COVID or to have a positive COVID test. But their actual cause of death, if you actually look at their medical records, which is what these researchers did, they looked at the medical records, they interviewed the physicians that were caring for these patients, and based on that analysis, they determined that about 45% of the deaths occurred among people with COVID-19, but could not be directly attributed to the virus. 25% of the deaths, so only 1/4, were deaths where COVID was found to be directly responsible. And then about 29.6% of the deaths were cases where COVID was found to have contributed to the death, but was still not the main cause. So the main takeaway here is that, we were hearing these big numbers during the pandemic, this many people are dying per day, per week. And it was sort of, everyone was kind of lumped together. If they happened to just have COVID or have a positive test, then the media and, the public health agencies were just saying they died because of COVID. And what these results show is that, at least in this sample, 3/4 of the people did not die directly because of COVID.
From the start, we didn't make autopsies, all of them. They said that they're afraid of virus, but I'm not sure how they can be afraid of something what is dead, in the dead body. At the same time, we had a study from Germany that shows that non-single pathologists get sick from the autopsy of that person who died from COVID. And that is the only way how to prove that somebody died from COVID. unfortunately, it seems to that they are tracking just tests. And now, if it's true that 45% of people were not, didn't die from COVID, that means that we had inflation of documents, of papers, and that's why we had measures that are not suitable for real numbers. And what is most important, whenever somebody asks, for example, politicians who were involved, let's reanalyze and say what was happening during COVID, and everybody said, how can you ask when so many people die? In Croatia, that was 18,000, but it was really 80,000. Let's check it out and see what are the numbers reality. And we see here, according to this Omicron variant, that these numbers are different. Maybe from side of Alpha and Delta variant was something different, but we need to check it out and see what really data is telling us. Let's continue with the next paper.
Okay, the next paper, and I'm getting it open on my end, is a paper that was published in the journal Immunity, Inflammation, and Disease. It's titled Altered Circulating Cytokine Profile Among mRNA-Vaccinated Young Adults, a year-long follow-up study. This is another recent paper. It was published in April, and it's another relatively small sample. They looked at, the researchers are from Saudi Arabia. It's a team of about 6 or 7 researchers. They're from Saudi Arabia. And they looked at a sample of participants from the same country. It was 84 people in all. And they wanted to find out the impact of the COVID-19 vaccines on the what they call cytokine profile in those people. So what are cytokines? They're proteins that help regulate the immune system. And what this has to do is, it's similar to some of the earlier studies that we talked about today. It has to do with the impact of the contents of the mRNA vaccines on the human organism. So according to the study, persistent production of spike protein that we were talking about before, and the highly inflammatory nature of mRNA lipid nanoparticles may account for the elevated cytokine levels that were actually found in the sample that was studied. I mentioned lipid nanoparticles. What are those? They are intended to deliver the mRNA from the vaccine to human cells. But what other studies have found is that the lipid nanoparticles do that, but they also deliver DNA contaminants that have also been found in the mRNA vaccines to the cells, and they deliver this throughout the body. So this is another way in which DNA contamination gets introduced into the human body, and that can have genetic effects, not just on the individual that is vaccinated, but there have been studies that have suggested that this can then be passed down to offspring as well. So, let's say a woman gets pregnant, she could pass this, these DNA contaminants to her child as well. According to the according to Trial Site News, I'm coming back to them, they do a good job of analyzing a lot of these studies. They wrote, this study raises important questions about the long-term immunological imprinting of mRNA COVID vaccines in healthy young adults. So these were healthy people, there's nothing wrong with them, and they were found to have this persistently high level of cytokines, which is an indicator, as I said before, that the mRNA is highly present in their bodies after vaccination, and in fact, a year or more after vaccination. So this comes back to what we said before, the spike proteins, the mRNA, were supposed to, according to the vaccine manufacturers, only last a short amount of time. Here again, we have patients where this was found to be in their bodies a year or more after they got the vaccine.
Yes, well, now it's a very important question. Do young adults need COVID-19 vaccines? Despite the CDC says that there is a more beneficial than damage. I saw a new paper who was analyzing data from CDC, and they are showing there was no any advantage for young adults between 18 and 25 years old, and there was more damage than benefit. But this is something still in a peer-reviewed study. We will continue to inform people about this in the future. Let's continue with the next study, and this one is very important. This doesn't concern COVID-19 vaccines. It concerns regular flu vaccines. And we hear all the time that, come on, take flu vaccine, that will protect you. But it seems that is not that way.
Yes, absolutely. Now, this is a study that is a preprint. So we should clarify this, that this is, most of our studies that we're talking about today are peer reviewed. This is a preprint, which means it has not been peer reviewed yet, but it has been published on the largest preprint server for the health sciences called mRxiv. The title of the paper, Effectiveness of the Influenza Vaccine During the 2024-2025 Respiratory Viral Season. So it's looking at data that is very recent from the cold and flu season that just ended. And the authors of this paper, from what I understand, come from the Cleveland Clinic. The Cleveland Clinic is one of the largest, medical treatment and research facilities in the U.S. They have a website that is very widely referenced, even by doctors and medical professionals, with a lot of information about all sorts of, health issues, diseases, and so on. But focusing on the findings of this paper, even if it is still in peer review, so a preprint, the intent is that it will be submitted to journals. Maybe it already has been submitted for consideration, and then it will eventually be published. According to this paper, they found that people that received a flu vaccine for the 2024-2025 flu season had a 27% higher risk of getting the flu. So you get the flu vaccine thinking that it will protect you against catching the flu. And this study says that the opposite is occurring. It increases your likelihood of getting the flu. How did they do the study? Here we're talking about a big sample. So we can eliminate that criticism from this paper. They looked at the records of all of the employees of the Cleveland Clinic. So this is over 50,000 employees. About 82% of them received the flu vaccine during the study. So you have a large sample of total people. You have a large sample also that were vaccinated, and you still have about 1/5 of the sample almost that was unvaccinated. So there's a lot of data to work with over here. And they studied those individuals for 25 weeks, or 25-week period. And that's how they came up with their determination that those individuals that did get the flu vaccine, and these were the flu vaccines that were made for this year's flu virus, or the one that was expected to be the most common strain of the virus, had this 27% higher risk, which translated to a negative effectiveness rate of 26.9%. Now, this is important because medical professionals are oftentimes required by their employers or by laws in their regions to be vaccinated for the flu vaccine. My understanding is that among the Cleveland Clinic sample, those people that were not vaccinated were ones that had gotten exemptions because the Cleveland Clinic allowed exemptions, so employees to request exemptions for health reasons or religious reasons. Not everyone does that, but in this case, Cleveland Clinic did. So you had some employees that were not vaccinated, and that led to this very good data set that could be compared for vaccinated and unvaccinated people and their outcomes.
Well, there is a message for audience next year when they will tell you to take vaccines. Just ask them, do you have more chance to get flu with vaccine or without? And if they say there is a less chance, ask them proof, because you can see here proof that it's opposite. Let's continue. What is our next study?
Okay, so I'm pulling up a paper here titled Persistent Epigenetic Memory of SARS-CoV-2 mRNA Vaccination in Monocyte-Derived Macrophages. We'll break that down in a minute. This is a paper that was published in a very highly rated journal, from what I understand, called Molecular Systems Biology. Sorry about that. It was authored by 19 scientists primarily from Germany. And what this study did, if we sort of break down a very scientific title, is that it linked the mRNA COVID vaccines to long-term genetic changes, in genetic structures, and specifically changes that can provoke an inflammatory response in people. Now, why is that significant? It is significant because this increased inflammatory response can lead to the onset of cancer and can lead to the onset of autoimmune disorders. It could lead to increased risk of leukemia, brain tumors, and a range of other health issues. And I think what this shows us is, we've seen in recent years the increased incidence of what many scientists are calling turbo cancers. Of course, some government and public health officials have denied that there is such a thing as turbo cancer, but a lot of other scientists are saying that they are seeing this. A lot of doctors are saying that they have seen unusually rapid onset cancer in some of their patients. And we've seen a lot of the vaccine injuries, the adverse effect that some vaccinated people got after getting the COVID vaccines, and not just the mRNA ones, by the way, have included a lot of, in some cases, what used to be rare autoimmune disorders. This is one of those issues where you could sort of use the common saying, where there's smoke, there's likely fire. I have a quote in my Defender story about this study from an epidemiologist by the name of Nicholas Holscher. He said, the study adds to the large body of evidence that describes the potent dysregulating effect of mRNA injections. So dysregulating your immune system instead of regulating it. He said that the study raises serious concerns about the long-term impacts on the human immune system, on the possible increased risk for chronic inflammatory disease, and also what he called oncogenic processes. That's another way of saying cancerous or cancer-causing processes. So that's what we can take away from this study from these 19 German scientists.
Yeah, we heard in our public papers, they said that the main reason for increasing cancers is SARS-CoV-2 virus, exactly COVID-19 illness. Nobody is mentioning COVID-19 vaccines. But this paper is showing something differently. And this is not the only paper, because I also had some interviews also with oncologists who were explaining there is more than 10 ways how to connect COVID-19, vaccines against COVID-19 and cancers. Let's see, because we are facing enlargement of cancer cases in Croatia. Lots of our close friends died because of sudden cancer who could take them away in just a few weeks or a few months. And usually it would take much more time because they don't know how to respond to the new kind of cancers what they are facing now. These are the words from people that I spoke with, and that are oncologists and pathologists who examine this. Let's continue. What is our next paper? What shows?
Okay, so the title of this paper is Delayed Fatal Pulmonary Hemorrhage Following COVID-19 Vaccination, Case Report, Batch Analysis, and Proposed Autopsy Checklist. And the co-authors here are Nicholas Holscher, who we just mentioned a moment ago. So now we have a paper that he has co-authored, and he wrote it along with Peter McCulloch, who a lot of your audience may be familiar with as well. He's an American cardiologist and has been outspoken about the adverse impacts of the COVID vaccines. This was published in the International Journal of Innovative Research in Medical Science. It's an open access journal, which means it's not a journal that is subscription-based or behind a paywall, but it is a peer-reviewed journal. So we're looking at a peer-reviewed paper over here. And what happened over here is we see a couple of issues over here. This paper focused on the case of one individual. So we're not talking about a large sample here, but this was a 47-year-old who had a good medical history, was not on any medication, and received the Pfizer mRNA COVID vaccine. This 47-year-old died from a pulmonary embolism 555 days after getting the vaccine, so about a year and a half later, a year and a half after vaccination. What is a pulmonary embolism? It's a blood clot, and we've seen blood clots as a common cause of death among some people that have received the COVID-19 vaccine. So I mentioned, by the way, this study was published in February. The study notes that the COVID shots have been previously associated with pulmonary hemorrhage, typically observed shortly after vaccination. So, the question someone might ask over here is, here we're talking not about someone who died shortly after vaccination, but 555 days later. So if you actually look at the health records of this individual, his health began to deteriorate. He eventually experienced severe respiratory distress and cardiac arrest. We've seen a lot of that among people that have had adverse effects following the COVID vaccines. As this person's health declined, they eventually passed away. Now, what is the other important finding of the study? The authors of this paper looked at the specific batch from which the vaccine that he received, the Pfizer vaccine, came from. Because, when any vaccine manufacturer produces their product and sends it out to hospitals and doctors and so forth, these come in different batches that are made at different times. They might be made in different facilities that are in different parts of the world. And each of these batches has a batch number. And there are websites online that have been tracking the number of adverse events that have been reported for COVID-19 vaccine injuries or injuries that are suspected to be related to the vaccines. And they have been correlating them with the batches. There's been other studies that have done this too. And those studies, several studies have found that there were certain batches of the COVID vaccines, including the Pfizer vaccines, that had an unusually high rate of deaths and severe injury. There were other batches that had almost no reports of deaths and injury. And what that does is it calls into question the consistency of the manufacturing process. It seems to indicate that some of the vaccines were more dangerous than others, even though they were supposedly the same, from the same manufacturer. So that calls into question the safety of the vaccines themselves, but also the process through which they are produced.
Yes, this is very important. There is a page named How Bad Is My Batch? You can find number of your batch and see how many adverse events has this batch. What is important? We were looking to see original documents, agreement between European Union and Pfizer. That's a famous Pfizer paper about, Ursula von der Leyen SMS messages. But we couldn't get it. I saw one from the start, one script of the agreement. And this script says it's for the first quantity. First, I think it was 1.7 million doses. And it said inside that Pfizer said they cannot guarantee serial production. They cannot guarantee that all batches and all vials will be the same. And they said that there will be adverse events and we cannot do anything about it. Anyhow, we decided to buy this without guarantee. That means politicians who signed this contract knew that Pfizer cannot guarantee serial production. That means that all batches will be the same quality. Let's continue. We have seen now additional case for also young people that's showing something very, very danger and concerning.
Okay, this is a very interesting paper titled Vaccination and Neurodevelopmental Disorders, a study of 9-year-old children enrolled in Medicaid. Well, Medicaid in the US is a program that provides health care to lower income families. The authors of this paper come from what is called the Chalfant Research Institute. It is located in Mississippi. This was published in a peer-reviewed journal called Science, Public Health Policy, and the Law back in January. And what the authors of this paper did was they looked at Medicaid data from Florida. Every state has its own Medicaid program in the US. They looked at children that were born and continuously enrolled in this program from the date that they were born up until the age of 9. And they looked at their health records because Medicaid has all of these records, the vaccinations that they received, when they received those vaccinations, and of course, all of their other health issues if they had any. That was all part of the records that were studied here. And this was a large sample. It totaled 47,155 children. And what it found was that children that had received children that were vaccinated, we're not talking about the COVID-19 vaccines anymore. We're talking about the the typical childhood vaccines. Children that were vaccinated had a 170% higher chance of being diagnosed with autism compared to children that did not get their childhood vaccines. The study also found that the vaccinated children had a 212% higher likelihood of developing other sorts of neurodevelopmental disorders. So these include ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, epilepsy, seizures, brain inflammation, learning disorders, and tics, where you have these involuntary spasms. So the study found that the childhood vaccination schedule, which in the US is very extensive, I think it is tied for first place among countries, at least in the Western world, for the highest number of vaccines that are administered to infants and that are recommended to children. So that has been called into question by a lot of scientists and by Robert F. Kennedy himself. It shows that the childhood vaccination schedule is likely a significant contributor both to the higher autism rate and all of the higher rate of these other neurodevelopmental conditions. In fact, they found that the more childhood vaccines a child got, the more that the odds of having one or more of these conditions went up. So the risk is there even if you get one of the childhood vaccines. If you get 2 or 3 or more, the risk keeps going up. Now, Robert Kennedy mentioned the study during one of his confirmation hearings before the Senate back in, I think it was January or early February, before he was confirmed as health secretary. So this study got a lot of attention just from that alone. And of course, in recent weeks, we have seen Kennedy and other public health officials that are now part of the new administration in the US come out and say that they are going to fund studies that are going to extensively examine what may be causing autism, because we had some new statistics recently. Up until a few weeks ago, officially, according to the CDC, 1 in 36 children in the US had autism. That number is now down to 1 in 31. In some parts of the US, like California, where vaccination rates are higher, that number is even lower than that. So we're talking about a huge number of children that have autism. Now, for some of them, it might be very mild. We're talking about a spectrum here. But for some, these are more severe forms of autism that really limit what they're able to do in their lives. So if we look at statistics, if you go back to the 1990s, I think the rate in the early 90s was 1 in 10,000. And what the media often tells us is, well, the reason for that is because we've gotten better at diagnosing autism. But that has been called into question by other scientists that say, if you look at the number of children that have severe autistic symptoms that would be very hard to miss, by any doctor in any era, that has gone up significantly as well. So there's more to it than just being better at diagnosis. Maybe that is part of the case, but certainly we're seeing that there's other factors that are likely causing this increase too.
Yes, I had also interview with lawyer Aaron Siri, and he was FOI CDC, that means Freedom of Information Act. He was demanding proof. There is no connection between vaccines, pediatric vaccines, and autism. And he was leading this case, legal case, for 1.5 years. And finally, you know what they said? They said, we don't have any proof because we don't investigate. And not only that, last summer was published one paper where co-author was Richard Plotkin. He is the Caesar of vaccines in the United States. And he admitted there, no, we don't track side effects from pediatric vaccines because we don't have enough money for it. We need more money for it. That means whenever you ask some doctor, is there any connection between autism and vaccines or anything like this? The only honest answer can be, we don't know because we don't track. Okay, let's continue. What is our next paper showing here? It's something that was in Croatian Parliament on the 1st of December 2023, when we had guests here, and one of the guests was Kevin McKernan, who firstly discovered there was a contamination of these vaccines with plasmid DNA, and this paper is showing the same thing. Let's see next paper. Yes.
This is a very interesting paper, and at first glance, it might be easy for people to dismiss it because it was published in something called the Journal of High School Science. So, someone might say, well, high school students did this study. How seriously can we take it? But I'll get into that in a second. The title is A Rapid Detection Method of Replication-Competent Plasmid DNA from COVID-19 mRNA Vaccines for Quality Control. It was published in late December. Now, a couple of things here that kind of counter the argument that, these are not, like seasoned scientists that performed this study. First of all, the study was performed at a U.S. Food and Drug Administration laboratory, and it was performed under the supervision of FDA scientists. So these were not just 3 kids that were like in their bedrooms running an experiment. They did this in an FDA laboratory alongside FDA scientists. They wrote a paper that was peer-reviewed, and the scientists that I spoke with said that the paper is methodologically sound. So, whoever these kids are, their advisors did a good job of guiding them through this process and helping them write this paper. So let's get into what the paper is actually talking about. The paper found that the levels of residual DNA, in other words, DNA contamination, in the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, so it focused specifically on the Pfizer vaccine, were anywhere between 6 times to 470 times higher than regulatory safety limits. What are those regulatory safety limits? According to the FDA, it is 10 nanograms per dose. So the safety limits, according to the FDA, 10 nanograms of DNA material per dose is the maximum for a vaccine. And yet this study found that the contamination level was 6 times higher, all the way up to 470 times higher in this vaccine. Now, the study says that the potential health risk that these residual DNA fragments may pose to humans is still unknown. In other words, it's telling us further study is needed. But one of the things that the author said is that this DNA contamination may result in what they call insertional mutagenesis. In other words, DNA mutations, we talked about this before, that can potentially cause cancer. You mentioned Kevin McKernan before. He was, I think, the first scientist that identified this DNA contamination. And then you had some public health agencies, I think notably that of Canada, that confirmed that this contamination exists. McKernan said, I interviewed him a few months ago on CHD TV, which is the Children's Health Defense TV channel, that DNA in vaccines can pose health risks because the DNA can integrate into the human genome. It can disrupt the human genome, or it can disrupt other genes that can then, lead to the onset of the growth of cancer cells in the human body. Now, the final thing I'll say is that, again, high school students, even though they seem to have been supervised very well, they did the study, but there have been several studies in the last 2 years or almost 2 years that have found the DNA contamination in all sorts of COVID-19 vaccines that were sampled. So this is not an isolated result. It's another one of several results that studies have found showing this contamination.
Yes, and of course we have officials from outside of officials in Canada, not only in Canada, they found this. But just that they say it's not that danger, but there is something very important. This limitation of residual DNA was made much before they invented and used these nanoparticles, lipid nanoparticles as a vehicle to insert, exactly to come in this in a cell. And that means they have to reevaluate it, these limitations, because we have now new technology. And it's not only that problem, there is an additional problem that was frame shifting. That means this messenger RNA send a message to produce some other proteins, and we don't know which one. And we have already 13 billion doses injected, and there was production of some other proteins, and nobody knows which one, because that was a mistake in this technology. They admitted, okay, we were building this airplane while we were driving this airplane, but let's start from beginning again and reevaluate again all these things, because this is completely new technology what we are using now in so many people, and there is so many mistakes, and we cannot pass by and just say, look, it was a mistake, we can repair it again. Let's see, there is one more paper what is telling about contamination, and there's additional contamination inside. It's SV40, and it's carcinogenic. And this SV40, it came in this story much later. I heard some explanation how, but let's see what this paper is saying.
Yes, so this is a paper that was published in a journal we saw before, Science, Public Health Policy and the Law. It was published in December by 3 German scientists. It's titled BioNTech RNA-based COVID-19 injections contain large amounts of residual DNA, including an SV40 promoter enhancer sequence. So BioNTech, as you might know, co-produced the original COVID vaccine with Pfizer. So it was the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. And what the study found, it was a peer-reviewed study, is that the DNA contamination in these vaccines, according to their samples, was 3 to 4 times higher than that 10 nanogram per dose regulatory limit that the FDA and also other international authorities have established. Then, of course, one of the main findings related to that is that looking at the contamination, the vaccines that they looked at were contaminated with simian virus 40, commonly known as SV40. This is the contamination that Kevin McKernan, who we were talking about before, had identified going back to 2003. I spoke to him about this study, and he called it a tour de force on the DNA contamination topic. He wrote on Substack, where he has a blog, that the study's authors did a very good job methodologically. They knocked it out of the park, which is an American expression, that they hit a home run. They did a really, really good job with their study. Jessica Rose, some of your audience may know her. She's an immunologist and biochemist. She's very good at analyzing, statistical data that pertains to, for instance, vaccine safety. She called this the paper of the century. She said it was a very well-written paper. It was a very well-organized study. And this confirmation that it gives us about the DNA contamination and specifically the SV40 contamination is significant. Now, why is SV40 contamination significant? This relates again to what we were talking about before, which is the risks that DNA contaminants may pose to the human body. These risks include cancer risks, as we mentioned, and they also include a higher risk of autoimmune diseases, and notably, not just among the vaccinated, but also other people, because the spike proteins that we were talking about before that the mRNA vaccines also contain are prone to shedding. So if the vaccine contents are prone to shedding, everything that goes along with that, including these DNA contaminants like SV40, can potentially at least be transferred even to people that are not vaccinated or not up to date, so to speak, with their vaccinations. And this is one, again, of several studies that have come out in recent months, in the past year or so, that have pointed out this DNA contamination. Now, the final and perhaps most important thing of all is that the authors of this paper called for, this is a quote, an immediate halt of all RNA biologicals. So that includes, of course, mRNA products. So they're saying that the administration of these products should stop. We've seen increasing calls saying the same thing by a lot of organizations. Children's Health Defense has signed on to one of these, and several other organizations of doctors and scientists. But also we've seen, for instance, the Surgeon General of Florida, Joseph Ladapo, come out and say the same thing. We saw recently the report that came from the government of Slovakia, also saying the same thing, that mRNA products are dangerous and should probably be stopped, the administration of them to be stopped. There's other state legislatures in the US that are proposing and debating laws that would place a moratorium on the administration of mRNA vaccines. So there are increasing voices that are not just questioning the safety of mRNA vaccines, but they're also saying, because we have these questions about the safety, even if not everything has been absolutely confirmed yet, there are enough doubts that lead to a very reasonable suggestion that we should at least pause the administration of these products until we have better data.
Well, Michael, let's repeat where my audience can find your work.
Absolutely. The Defender can be found at childrenshealthdefense.org/defender. And we are also on Substack. On Substack, it is defender.substack.com. We're also very active on Telegram. You can just look for Children's Health Defense on Telegram, and that account shares all of the Defender stories. And we are on X, the former Twitter, Children's HD.
Thank you, Michael. Continue with your work for sure. That will help us lots to find out what really science is saying.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure, and I'm happy to discuss these issues anytime.
Evo, dragi narode, imali ste prilike vidjeti dio znanosti. Naime, pokušavam svaki put u emisiji dovesti nešto znanosti, i to one koje ne možete čuti u mainstreamu. Postavlja se pitanje, a zašto ne možete čuti u mainstreamu? Odgovor je dosta jednostavan. Naime, mainstream je cijelo vrijeme sudjelovao u propagandi nečega što danas razotkrivamo da nije bilo baš tako. Stoga, naravno, kako ne bi morali priznati da su u tome sudjelovali, pokušat će i dalje šutiti. Naime, ne samo mainstream mediji, nego i mainstream politika. Još uvijek su na vlasti oni koji su u tome sudjelovali. Pogotovo u Hrvatskoj. Sa razočarenjem DP-a koji je ušao u takvu koaliciju na politici da će razotkriti šta će biti o pandemiji, i dalje je HDZ, i ne samo HDZ, nego i cijela oporba koja je u tome sudjelovala, još uvijek na vlasti. I kao što znate, 2 puta je pokrenuta inicijativa da se otvori istražno povjerenstvo, i 2 puta je za pandemiju i 2 puta je odbijena. Zašto? Ako istovremeno ministar Beroš kaže kako su odlično odradili posao za vrijeme pandemije, i istu stvar govori naš premijer koji je usporedio pandemiju sa Domovinskim ratom, kako je moguće da godinu dana poslije završetka tog velikog događaja, dakle najveće krize Domovinskog rata, mi to ne istražujemo, a pritome se hvale kako su sve dobro učinili? Sad ovog trenutka je pokrenuta inicijativa, odnosno odobrena, skupila je dovoljni broj glasova moja gošća iz prethodnih emisija, gospođa Christine Anderson, europarlamentarka, i objavila da će se formirati istražno povjerenstvo o pandemiji u Europskom parlamentu. Kao što ste već čuli, formirano je i istraženo u Slovačkom parlamentu, u Alberti također, u Kanadi, u Floridi također. I također su u Sjedinjenim državama napravljene izvješća koja jasno pokazuju, danas ih možete vidjeti na službenim stranicama Bijele kuće, što se krivo radilo za vrijeme pandemije. Među svim tim stvarima, naravno, ne samo su mjere, nego i sve ostale politike koje su bile vezane uz pandemiju. Pa zašto onda sad u Hrvatskoj to i dalje ne želimo istraživati? Naime, vidjeli ste da se mnogi pozivaju na znanost i govore o dokumentima koji su relevantni navodno jer su objavljeni u uglednim časopisima. Međutim, i to sam na svojim stranicama objavio, da ti ugledni časopisi su bili u sukobu interesa sa zainteresiranim stranama koji su željeli službeni narativ provoditi, od službene politike preko prodaje ovog proizvoda koji nije bio provjeren, preko svih ostalih politika lockdowna koji su uništili mnoga gospodarstva, ali su također mnogima i donijeli profit. Vrijeme je da saznamo tko je stradao, a tko je profitirao. Dokument, odnosno studija koji su izabrali da se pozivaju u kontinuitetu je ona koja pokazuje da su spasili milijone života. Imao sam i o tome emisiju i o tome smo prezentirali dokaze kako je ta studija bila čisto amaterska prevara koja je na osnovu nekih modela koji predviđaju nešto što potpuno krivo predviđaju, niti mogu predvidjeti, su predvidjeli da smo spasili milijone života. To je ono zašto se drže. Drže se, spasili smo više ljudi nego što je stradalo. Da nismo to radili, ko zna koliko bi ljudi umrlo. Nemaju za to dokaz, odnosno dokaze koje nude su više manje sramota za znanstvenu zajednicu, a ne nešto na što se treba znanstvenik pozivati, a političari se i tako pozivaju na sve ono što opravdava njihove postupke. Stoga nadam se da će današnja emisija otvoriti svim vama koji niste imali priliku preko društvenih mreža koje su bile cenzurirane i ljudi kao što je gospodin Michael bio koji je objavljivao to na Telegram grupi gdje se stiglo i niste mogli dobiti na televiziji, da ćete pročitati, vidjeti što unutra piše i razmisliti svojom glavom. Dokle god imamo ponudu jedne i druge strane, imamo čime razmišljati. Dokle god je cenzura, dobivamo formiranje mišljenja, a ne informiranje. Ova emisija služi upravo zato da govori o neugodnim temama i ja vam mogu iz prve ruke reći da svi oni koji su tome sudjelovali sa znanstvene strane znaju da sve ovo što govorimo o emisijama je točno. Ja im se zahvaljujem ovog časa jer neki od njih i gledaju ove emisije. Sad je pitanje za njih, naravno, da li je važnije sačuvati još to malo ugleda znanosti i medicine koje je ostalo, nego priznati istinu. Mi kao običan narod, naravno, željeli bi znati istinu, a vi kao sudionici te znanstvene skupine i medicine ćete vjerovatno pokušati sačuvati svoj ugled, ne priznajući da se sve ovo dogodilo što sad obrađujem u mojim emisijama. Jer što ako to priznate, što će misliti o svom vašem ostalom radu? Da li ćete potpuno izgubiti ugled i da vam više niko neće vjerovati? Mislim da je malo prekasno za to, zato što već sada, prema mojim nekakvim onako amaterskim istraživanjima sa društvenih mreža vidljivo je da nitko više ne vjeruje struci i znanosti i nažalost morat ćemo puno poraditi po tome da se ponovo vrati povjerenje, ako je moguće, ali u međuvremenu ćemo morati i tražiti odgovorne da odgovaraju za pogreške koje su napravili. Da li namjerno ili iz nemara. Svejedno, rezultat je loš. Hvala lijepo na pažnji i uskoro se vidimo u sljedećoj epizodi Slobodni.
Da im se svima, i malima i velikima, i bogatima i siromašnima, i slobodnjacima i robovima dade žig na njihovu desnu ruku ili na čela njihova, te da nitko ne može ništa kupiti ili prodati, osim onoga ko ima žig ili ime zvijeri ili broj imena njezina.